Okay, good afternoon again and good morning to our West Coast attendees. Welcome to OJJDP's Performance Management Team's Performance Measures Review session. We are so glad you've joined us and hope you will find the information helpful as you consider your awards performance measures and the upcoming reporting period, which is rapidly approaching us at this point. For today's session, next slide please. Throughout today's session, we will be posting our contact information and links to additional resources in the chat feature as we go along. You should see our contact information in the chat box now, actually. And we will also monitor the chat and do our best to respond to your questions. And be sure to keep track of the questions in case we don't get to them all today, so that we can address them in follow-up sessions or in written resources. So since we'll be using the chat feature today, we'd like to just do a quick practice chat. Next slide. And so we're hoping that we can practice with the chat in a way that may help our team learn more a bit about you. So if you would please post your answer to this question that you see on the screen in the chat box on the right side of your screen. Let us know what state you're located in and what program you're working with. Or alternatively, if you're viewing this webinar with a group of folks, you can post in the chat the number of you who are viewing together. Just make sure in the chat box in the to fields, everyone is chosen, and then just simply type your answer and hit the arrow or the enter button. I'm not seeing any responses yet, so I want to just make sure that the chat is functioning. Here we go. I see one. Thank you so much. Illinois, reducing risk for girls. Pennsylvania, excellent. Utah, excellent. Thank you all so much for responding. Knoxville, wonderful, thank you. Great. Thank you everyone for responding. Just a couple of other housekeeping announcements, if you can go to the next slide. Just so you all know, the session is partially recorded today and will be posted on the OJJDP website in the coming weeks. When we get to the question and answer session, we'll stop the recording. So the beginning will be recorded. We will also be sending out copies of the presentation after we've concluded today to all attendees and all registrants. And then, of course, keep in mind that although all are welcome, our focus today is on the OJJDP performance measures for fiscal year 2020 and forward awards. Next slide. Again, welcome to anyone who may have just joined us, and thank you for joining us. We are happy you are here with us today as we discuss the fiscal year 2020 and forward awards performance measures. I am Jill Ruggiero, one of 2 training and technical assistance specialists with the OJJDP performance management team. I am also joined by several of my colleagues, some of whom you may hear from today, but I would especially like to introduce our task lead, Ann Schiff, and the other TTA specialist, Erin Feely, who you will hear from momentarily, and of course our help desk support specialist, Shanice Johnson. Our agenda today includes a brief reminder on why performance measures are important, an overview of fiscal year 2020 and forward performance measures, and then we'll go into a few important reporting reminders. So by the end of the session today, we hope that everyone will remember, and also we recognize that this may be a refresher for some, but we're hoping everyone remembers why performance measures are so very important, which is ultimately because they help OJJDP accomplish its mission. They also influence evidence-based policy and, importantly, lead toward program sustainability. We're also hoping that you understand your program's assigned performance measures and the usefulness of the definitions and questions documents, which we really can't stress enough. We're going to talk a lot about today in collecting and reporting that data sought, and then also to be able to easily find support and resources. So I'm going to turn it over to Erin Feely to introduce herself and start the overview of the 2020 and forward performance measures. Erin?
Thanks, Jill. As Jill mentioned, I'm the Other Training and Technical Assistance Specialist, providing contractor support to OJJDP around performance measures and, OPMT system, kind of all of that fun stuff. So what we're going to do now is go a little bit more into fiscal year 20 and forward performance measures. So this is fiscal years 20 and 21 at the moment. This is going to be kind of a high-level overview of some of the key aspects of the performance measures and definitions. What you're seeing on the screen right now is an example of the definitions and questions document. Documents were sent out to grant award administrators based on the solicitation title. So this is how you're going to know what performance measures were assigned to your award. These are the performance measures that you're going to need to collect data on, you're going to need to monitor a bit, and we're going to cover a little bit of the how and when to report kind of later on in the session today, but that report that's submitting the performance measures, that comes later. We really need to make sure that you're reading the assigned measures and that you're understanding the data that you're collecting, because remember, JustGrants is a reporting system for the measures, and you've really got to know what they are first. You do want to reach out to the Performance Measure Help Desk. I believe Shanice was nice enough to post our contact information. Don't worry about taking notes, copies of the slides, and our contact information will come out to you in the near future. So while we are looking at this particular slide, I do want to point out a few things. The definition and questions document, these are the measures that you're going to look at. You're going to go through and you're going to find all of the measures. You're going to set up a performance management plan, or at least that's a good recommendation of something to do, to find a way to define and align the performance measures to the goals and objectives of your award. So I'll mention a performance management plan. It's not a requirement, it's not a required document, but again, it's a suggested best practice. And really want to make sure that all grantees are understanding how these measures align to your goals. Thank you. In the registration questions, a number of you did make comments about feeling that some of these may be a challenge to collect data on, and that's okay. You may need to, consider how you're going to make a plan to collect that data in the future. And really, I think the bottom line that you want to think about is an audit trail when you're looking at these documents and these measures. If your grant manager were to ask you why you reported on certain measures, can you tell them why? Can you tell them why you reported on certain measures but not others? Can you show that connection between the performance measures and goals and objectives? So I know many of you have also asked questions about reporting zero if you cannot collect on certain performance measures and data points. And you know what, that's okay. There are places within the JustGrants question set to kind of provide us that feedback towards the end to let us know which performance measures may be a challenge to collect some data on. Now, when I mentioned data and the data points, I do want to a moment just talking about how to read these documents. So as you'll notice, there are 3 columns. There's going to be a questions column. It's going to be a definitions column, which is going to be kind of some broad definitions to provide you some guidance around what that performance measure is asking. That 3rd column, that's the data points that you're going to be collecting and tracking for your particular program. So I do want to point out one thing about that 1st column. Some of the questions will say percentage, or what is the percent of. So I just want to point out this is something that our team, our performance measure team, we're going to calculate. Don't worry, that was something I wish I knew when I was a grantee, that the performance measure team will actually calculate that. Again, what you want to focus on is that 3rd column of the data points. We've been talking a bit about the measures and the definitions. I just kind of wanted to take a step back and kind of show you a little bit of what things will look like in JustGrants. grant award administrators. I do want to acknowledge that for some programs, July of 2022 may be the first time that you're going to be seeing the performance measures. Violence prevention, that's an example of a program that already has their performance measures showing up in JustGrants. So again, too, this is to kind of show you that that third column with the data points, that's really what you're going to see when you get into JustGrants. So you really want to make sure that you've taken the time with the definition and questions document first. So if you're unsure if you have the correct definition and questions document, if you're unsure about aligning some of these questions to your goals and objectives, again, please feel free to reach out to our help desk. We'll be happy to correspond over email or set up via Webex, and we can talk specifically about the measures that were assigned and your specific program. That to ask questions early and often. These performance measures will continue to be around for the life of your award, and we really do want to hear from you. We do want that feedback. Next slide. Another aspect that you want to consider as you work on any data collection systems or any performance management plans for your organization, in that definition and questions document are the specific headers. So you really want to watch those because these different headers will highlight sections that may apply to multiple purpose areas within a solicitation. So for example, you may see the term overall or multi-program. Then you're also going to see some that are a bit more specific. So if you can see the example here on the screen, we're talking about some headers that will specifically to training and technical assistance providers. The second example there is for our ICAC folks who are on the phone. There may be some specific measures that are assigned for task forces, again, versus training and technical assistance providers. So please do carefully look at those headers on the document because, again, they will also line up with what the grant award administrator will see in JustGrants. So I do want to take a moment to highlight that as you're looking through these, it's going to feel like some of these performance measures might not fit. So be careful of choosing or omitting performance measures without me first considering if you can make a plan to collect that data in the future and report it in the future. Or again, within the performance management plan, can you draw logical reason as to why a certain performance measure is not reported on? One example that many of you may have noticed and did call out in your registration is the protective factors. So we're going to talk about that in the next section. I think kind of the bottom line here is really think about that audit trail again. Again, remember if you're grant manager, if we come into any discussions, with your team to understand more about your program, you really want to, you're aligning and finding all of the possible measures. Use them as a way to really look at your program and what's possible. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that I do want to bring up as a performance measure tip, many programs do have a question around individual served. What I want to highlight here is that within the individual served question, there are quite a few data points to collect, and they are broken out often into, as you can see here, age ranges. And there is also a difference between new and carried over. I do want to highlight that because the carried over, basically returning clients. These are individuals who you may have reported on in a previous report and are still part of the program within a current report. Let me stop there and the current reports most often are going to be the activity period, which is what happened over the course of the last 6 months. So sometimes I know it can be You can read a certain question and think that the question is asking about the life of the award, or it's asking about the entire community. Focus down and remember that performance measures most often are really asking about the activity period. And if you're not sure, again, please reach out to the Performance Measure Help Desk. We'll be happy to talk it through with you. To bring this one up too, because this is a very popular question coming into the help desk. What are the different types and categories of performance measures for OJJDP? So for fiscal year 20 and forward, the performance measures include the types and categories that you see here for ease of use and accessibility. Performance measures are broken down into outputs mostly and outcomes. Outputs are product-based. An output is a countable product or service that your program provides. The volume of work accomplishes, so think of number of trainings conducted, technical assistance requests. Those are kind of like the easiest, most tangible examples I can think of for outputs. Outcomes are a bit more broad. They're a change in knowledge, attitude, skill, or behavior that occurs within an individual, maybe within a family. For a few of you, it may be actually system or community-wide. These are kind of a bit more long-term. Not going to be so tangible and show up in every single performance report. A little bit more detail on those categories that I just talked about. So I do kind of want to highlight specifically the overall and the multi-program measures. So if you remember back to that definition and questions document, that second column had a definition in it. And if you see the term overall measure, and then you look at that definition, it's going to be very, very broad, because that is a performance measure that is assigned to many, many different awards. It could be the same performance measure assigned to someone with a Children Exposed to Violence award. It could also be assigned to mentoring. It could also be assigned to a Second Chance Act grantee. So again, those are the performance measures where you've really got to take the time within your team to say, okay, what does this mean to our program? We talked about grantees, who were new or returning. Service, what does that mean? Because that's a very overall term. What does that mean to your award? Because again, what providing service means to someone with a mentoring award is going to be very, very different than someone who has a community violence prevention award. Next slide. If any of you, and I think many of you may have, awards in fiscal years 2017 to 2019, you may have reported in the PMT system. You may have also had some contact with our team asking you to what we call check or validate your performance measures. So this is a process that happens with PMT measures. This is a process that's also going to happen with fiscal year 20 and 21 and forward performance measures. So I kind of wanted to take some time in this section to go over what validation. How do you check and make sure that the data that you are reporting is consistent and accurate? Take some examples and next slide. So when we talk about the performance management plans, one of the pieces of that plan is checking or monitoring your data. And that kind of happens after you've done the data collection, but before you get into a report in a system like JustGrants. So the example that we're going to use here for sake is July of 2022. That example as we look at the steps on the slide here. So 1 through 3 relate to the performance management plan aspects we recommend that you as a grantee do to collect and monitor your data. So looking at the activity period, the 6 months of work. that was supported by OJJDP funds. Again, usually not the whole award, usually not the whole community. We're going to look at just, for example, individuals served. Step 4 is where you've submitted that report. Where your grant manager is going to look over your narrative questions, they're going to look over your data, they're going to kind of just do a check to see if there was anything unexpected, see what the progress is up to this point. Then step 5, I'll go into much more detail in the next few slides on what it means. This is where my team comes into play. This is where we do the validations. We are going to look at some key performance measures, and we're going to kind of check or review what you've reported in relation to, for example, individuals served. And that's called a validation. So these steps kind of help create confidence in data that's reported for OJJDP leadership when they use all of those data pieces pulled together from various grantees for data reports to the president, to Congress, to the public. Again, validation, that's another one of those terms I wish I knew as a grantee a little bit more. So I think if we can go on to the next slide, we're going to go a little bit more into detail about what my team does and what a team can do as well before you submit that report into JustGrants. We're going to choose a key performance measure. It will serve kind of a one that is considered an overall measure. Many grantees are assigned this one. Something that we kind of look at a lot for validation. So what you're going to start out with here is looking at children, youth, young adults, other family members, those who were considered carryover, those who were considered new. You're going to take the time to make sure that you are reporting each of those individual data points. Then what we're going to do is you're going to create some totals. And you're going to use those totals as you go through and report on the rest of your performance measures. So what you want to do is, as you're tracking these number of individuals served in activity period, you want to make sure that as you're going through that there are individuals receiving a service that reported under the individuals served question. So this is something where your grant manager or my team can also help examine data trends. And sometimes it can help shed light on where a program may be facing challenges, for example. So let's go to the next slide and we'll talk a bit more about individuals served and kind of how the validation actually works. So again, as I mentioned, first step, data collection. Together all of your totals for each of the data points during the activity period, and then keeping in mind that you want to create a total for all individuals served. And for some of you too, again, looking at those headers, you may also want to create some totals, for example, youth, children, young adults served, new and carried over kind of together. I'll tell you what I used to do is, in that key performance measure, I used to take that total that I had and I'd write it on a sticky note and kind of put it on my computer screen so that I remembered what it was as I was going through the next few pages of the performance report. I say a total. Another way to look at it is you're going to add up 1A to 1J, and is going to be your total, and then you're going to look at it and you're going to verify it against other measures. So next slide, and look at an example. So this is an example too. I also want to point out that we are trying to remind you of those validations and put that into JustGrants as a reminder. So for example, protective factors, again, this is a very common question. So once you've got that total of all individuals served, so for example, 10, you've served 10 individuals in a particular activity period, you want to make sure your protective factors, number of individuals adjudicated for a first-time delinquency or status offense, is less than or equal to your served. So again, this is that example. You don't want to have more individuals who are adjudicated for a first-time delinquency offense and then actually receive service in that activity period. An example of what something might look like. And we go on to the next slide. That's fine. When questions been coming through the help desk, everyone is asking this question. We're going to use this first as an example for the validation, and then we'll talk a little bit more about guidance on protective factors. So again, this is where you want to add up all those individuals served. You want to get that total, and you want to make sure that the number of individuals who received to improve self-esteem, that is less than or equal to the total number of individuals who receive services that activity period. And then you can move on to B, those who improve self-esteem. Again, that's another check or validation. Is B less than or equal to A? And let this kind of sink in. Sometimes this can feel a little confusing at first, but if you can do this with each report, it definitely does get a lot easier and become more second nature. Slide. I mentioned, stop and take a second to talk a little bit about protective factors, because again, this is a very common question at the help desk. So many of you have been assigned different protective factors. For example, we're going to use improved self-esteem as the one that we're going to talk about for the moment. This is one that you want to make sure that you are looking at the validations and checking your measures and making sure that the totals match up. I also do kind of want to point out too that there's something where you're really going to have to look at and kind of challenge yourself, challenge your team to say, which one of these aligns to our program goals? And this is one of those we acknowledge can feel as a challenge to collect and report. But these are very important outcomes to OJJDP. That's why they're there. That's why they're assigned. So you really want to find the ones, and this is a perfect example too. These should be measures where you can say these factors align to our program goals because. Kind of open for you all to kind of fill in. Next slide. The place that's up, as well as those headers and the definition and questions document that we talked about, is with training and technical assistance. This one I do want to call out a little bit too, because on those definition and questions documents, sometimes you will see what looks like duplicative measures. Headers come into play because these questions are often asked of T providers as well as direct service grantees. It's entirely possible that everyone's got different types of trainings that you can report at. And again, this may not have data that you're going to report every single period, but really do think about, especially if you are providing direct service, did you hold some training events? Did you hold them for the community? Did you hold them for your staff internally? Kind of what's out there, who received the training. You also want to point out that number 4, population trained. When you see that in JustGrants, that is actually going to be an open text field where you can actually type in some information. I just want to point that out because, for example, 1 through 3 on the slide right here, those are going to be numbers. You're going to actually enter a whole number. But as population trained, you'll actually be able to type in some text. Let's go on to the next slide. Again, I just wanted to kind of point these out because these are TA measures are similar to training in that they are assigned to both direct service, but they're also assigned to TPA providers. This, especially with TA and technical assistance, this is, again, really something that you're going to need to sit down and say, what does this mean to my particular program? Something, again, very different to an ICAC grantee than it does to someone with a community-based violence award. So we are going to transition to the next slide, and I am going to see if my colleagues Ro and Sarah are on the line. They had wanted to chat about specifically for our mentoring grantees.
Thank you so much. This is Ro Dewan. I'm a data analyst providing contractual support for the OJJDP PMP team. And on this slide, we just wanted to draw your attention to a distinction that was actually defined in the performance measures specific to mentoring. So this concerns the terminology of subgrantees versus subrecipients. And when we refer to subgrantees in the mentoring performance measures, we are referring to the provided subawards from a primary grantee to carry out part of the primary grantee's award. This appears in PM number 2 in the questions and definitions document for juvenile mentoring. And I will now turn it over to my colleague Sarah to go over subrecipients.
And I am Sarah Wazatsky, also a research analyst, contractor support. For subrecipients, that would be outside entities that provide goods or services ancillary to the award rather than carrying out part of the award. And subrecipients appears in Performance Measure 3 for juvenile mentoring under the measure number of subrecipient services access.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I would like to, this is Jill again, and I would just like to take just a moment, thank you Aaron, Ro, and Sarah, but would like to take just a moment to acknowledge that we realize we have just provided a tremendous amount of information in a short amount of time. Sometimes can feel overwhelming. We recognize that any of the reporting, especially as we near reporting period and reports being due, it can cause a little bit of stress, and that's definitely not what we want to leave this session with. So this is a good time to remind everyone that we are here to support in many different ways and avenues. So there are, as Aaron described, there are very broad sets of performance measures. And then we try to drill down as best we can to specific nuances to programs. But that seems to be a cause for stress and some confusion amongst grantees when we can't really align measures precisely to programs. So we want to take the time now, before we jump into the next section of reporting tips, to remind everyone that that is completely normal. We can help you walk through it if need be. There are a tremendous amount of resources on the OJJDP website, through our team, through contacting our help desk, scheduling a support session with either Aaron or myself, again through the help desk. I can say with certainty that when we speak directly to grantees who are feeling some of that stress and maybe some confusion, when they access the resources and then when we have conversations, it really does tend to help. So I'll remind everyone now to use those definitions and questions documents as a guide, and we'll go through a couple other tips on those documents, but they really are tremendously helpful in alleviating some of that confusion. But again, don't stress, we're here, we're not going anywhere, we'll help you through it, we'll answer any questions you may have either during this session or as a follow-up. So I'll switch gears a little bit and I'll go to a couple of reporting tips that we created based on frequently asked questions. So if you'd Perfect, thank you. So when you go to complete your July 2022 report in JustGrants, you should see two line items. There are a few grantees that will see one line item. That's because of the subgrantee reporting workaround that Erin, I think, mentioned, and I will talk a little bit more in detail on. But for the moment, most grantees should see two line items. The first will be your progress report questions. They appear in JustGrants as P&Q. Those are your qualitative narrative type information. And then the second line item will be the quantitative data, the actual performance measures that we talk so much about today and throughout the reporting period. Those are the measures that you find on your program definitions and questions. You should see those line items by July 2022, excuse me. And then I'll go a little bit more in detail about the exceptions. We encourage folks to use the P&Q narrative to report, to describe progress made on your goals and objectives, any challenges you may experience, and we'll also address, again, Erin has mentioned it, we'll remind you that that is also a good place to address maybe if you did not report data or if you reported zeros. Next slide. So again, the progress report, the narrative and performance measure reports are going to ask for a little bit of different information. Some is quantitative, some is qualitative. So they also then will ask for different types of information in your answers. Some will be numbers, some might be checkboxes, and some might be multiple choice. This is just an example showing you a couple of questions from the progress narrative, so the P&Q, as it's seen in JustGrants. Performance measure questions are the questions that are seeking a number, and then we ask grantees to enter a single whole number, no decimals or negative numbers. As Erin mentioned earlier, the questions and definitions documents on that outputs column in the far left, you may see where it's asking for a percentage in the outputs column. But the data points that we are asking grantees to report on in JustGrants, the questions you'll see in JustGrants are from that third column, which is titled questions. So you do not have to calculate percentages. That is, your data points will be whole numbers out of that far right-hand column. Some of the performance measure questions will also require answers and generate an error message if you skip it. So that's not to say that if you put a 0, you'll have an error message, but if you do not answer, you will receive an error message on some questions. Lots of times we get calls to the help desk thinking that the grantees are stuck, but if you read the text that appears in red, it will be more clear that it's simply an error because you skipped a question. So that's a helpful tip that we like to share with folks. And then again, if you enter zeros in any of the data points that you feel you would like to explain, and we certainly encourage you to do so, you should do that in the P&Q narrative report, or there's also a thank you page in the program question set in JustGrants that you can also explain more of your data, or lack thereof, I should say. Again, it is okay to report zeros for data points that simply do not align to your program, but be sure to explain that. Next slide. Thank you. So this is a good example where Erin mentioned earlier in the questions and definitions document, this is a great example of where if you don't read it carefully, it could cause some confusion. So we pulled an example from the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force program measures. That's the top example. The second screenshot you see is on training and technical assistance outcomes. So the headers on that document will ask for task force outcomes. So what was the training and technical assistance provided by the task force? But there's also a header on that document that asks for that information specifically from the TTA provider. So it can be cause for confusion if you don't read those subheaders really carefully. We often get a question of, well, this is the same question, number 9 is the same question as, let's say, number 18, but it in fact is asking from a different cohort. So be really careful to read those headers, and then it will become more clear. You should only be answering in one area. If you're a TTA provider, you answer under that data set, that data point, and if you're a task force, you answer under the task force for any question that seems duplicative. Next slide. So again, some programs we need to have some programs report subrecipient data via an Excel spreadsheet that will be submitted as an attachment to your semi-annual report. And this is only because subrecipient reporting functionality is not fully complete in JustGrants yet. So it does not affect all programs. It's just the programs you see on this slide. So Title II, Second Chance Act reentry, Second Chance Act children of incarcerated parents, and mentoring. So I believe some of those program grantees are with us today, which is why we wanted to make sure we highlight that. Any other program that might be in attendance today, if you have sub-recipients, you should aggregate their data and report it into JustGrants as usual. So I can't stress enough that the Excel spreadsheet workaround is only for the programs that you see on the screen right now. If you do not see your program listed, you should report your subrecipient data in the aggregate as you normally would submit your JustGrants report. And we'll let you know when and if this functionality changes and we no longer need to use the Excel workaround. We will definitely communicate that with you. The subrecipient Excel workaround contains only a few of the key performance measures. So let's say your program has 50 performance measures and you are one of the programs that is listed, mentoring, for example. You're not going to see all 50 of the performance measures. Because it's a workaround, we had to choose key performance measures. So you will actually report a few less on the Excel spreadsheet. Again, we will let you know when, in fact, that procedure changes, when the functionality for subgrantee reporting is fully functional. Copies of that Excel spreadsheet were sent to the grant award administrators, and you can certainly contact our help desk if you have not received that or need a copy. So again, we just provided you with a lot of information today that I'm guessing will need some processing. We went over a lot. So this is another really good time to remind folks that we are here. Our team is here to provide support we can. We're not asking you to report on anything that there are not resources for. So we promise that we have resources for you. If you do not find them yourselves on the OJJDP website or in your own performance management plan, we are happy to provide those resources and support for you. Some of the key takeaways from today that we think are super important to stress are how important performance reports are and why. Next slide, please. So performance reports are beneficial for OJJDP to meet federal legislation guidelines and data requests. Read and understanding assigned performance measures from the questions and definitions documents before reporting in JustGrants. We really can't stress that enough. We promise you that that will help alleviate some of the confusion if you look at your questions and definitions assigned performance measures before you report in JustGrants, but also maybe as you are completing your reports. And just another reminder that most questions ask for a number, but some are yes or no or text fields. And some awards, as we just mentioned, a few programs will report in an Excel document on just a few key performance measures only for the time being.